Are you ready for some snow? Well, we've got a blizzard of law. May it please the audience, I'm Rich Schoenstein. This is So Sue Me, and we're going to try something new and different. It's Friday afternoon. We've had a busy week of developments in a few different legal cases, and I'm just going to do a lightning round through 5 things that have been going on this week, kind of get you caught up and send you all out to play in the snow. Item number 1, Luigi Mangione back in federal court today. There was a hearing about his backpack. Now, you remember there are motions outstanding in the federal case. There are attacks on whether the death penalty can be pursued constitutionally. There are attacks on the underlying charges, and there are attacks on the evidence. And today's hearing was very limited. They brought in a police officer from Altoona to testify about the procedures because the prosecution says that whether or not the search of the backpack would have required a search warrant under other circumstances, it was inevitable that it was going to be searched because in Altoona, we inventory property whenever we arrest a suspect. And we arrested Luigi Mangione. We arrested him initially for giving a false identification. We therefore would have inventoried his belongings, including that backpack, and we would have found everything in it anyway. So don't worry, Judge, about whether the search that started in the McDonald's was proper or continued in the police car was proper. We were going to find that stuff no matter what. And the judge, the federal judge, who initially didn't think there needed to be a hearing, decided that she wanted to hear a little bit more about the procedures in the Altoona Police Department for inventorying, and that's what they heard about this morning. But also, the federal judge gave us some big news in the case. We now have a schedule forward in the federal case. First of all, there's going to be another hearing next week on January 30th, and we expect to get decisions from the judge on these evidentiary issues and importantly on the charges, because it's still an open question whether or not this is a death penalty case. The judge has said she wants jury selection to start September 8th, 2026. And if it's a non-capital trial, meaning no death penalty, the actual trial could start October 13. If it is a capital case, which is a death penalty case, which is a much more complicated, much more involved jury selection, that would begin January 30, 2027. But this case is going to move forward in the federal court system. The case in the New York State court system, you will remember, is awaiting a decision to come in May on the evidentiary issues there. And it's hard to imagine at this point that the New York State case could catch up to the federal case, meaning in all likelihood, whether it's a death penalty case or not, the federal case will go first. And the whether it's a death penalty case or not is the biggest issue, the biggest turning point in the case before trial, and we'll probably find out the answer to that question next week. All right, item number 2 in Texas, Uvalde, Texas, the trial of Adrian Gonzales, the former school police officer who was on trial related to the school shooting, that horrible school shooting in Uvalde. Gonzales was found not guilty on all 29 counts. Thank goodness the judge didn't buy this. The idea of pinning liability and responsibility for that school shooter on a security officer. I didn't understand why they were trying this case or prosecuting this case at all. And apparently neither did the jury, because they came in with a complete not guilty verdict. I won't belabor the point too much, but that whole situation makes me think again about the notion that the answer to bad guys with guns is good guys with guns. There were a lot of good guys with guns in Uvalde. They couldn't or didn't do anything sufficient to prevent the deaths and the ultimate chaos there. That maybe is not the right answer. But in any event, I also don't think it was an answer to prosecute that guy. He is going to have to deal with this his whole life, and maybe what he could have or should have done, but it wasn't worthy of sending him to jail. So that case is closed. Next, in New Mexico, we saw charges against Timothy Busfield. Now, Busfield had driven to New Mexico, turned himself in, and his reward for that is he was put in jail over the weekend and kept in custody. And then they had a hearing at the beginning of the week, and the judge was not impressed at all with the case, especially with a very good presentation made by Busfield's defense lawyers, some audio tape of the child witnesses apparently telling a different story, and some other problems with the evidence. The judge not only freed Busfield, but let him out on his own recognizance, didn't even require bail. And that was a huge setback for the New Mexico prosecutors. Now, you remember New Mexico is the state that also tried to prosecute Alec Baldwin, and that case got demolished in the closing days at trial last year. So this is another big swing, and so far a miss by New Mexico authorities trying to go after celebrities. The case isn't over. The charges are still filed. The charges are still pending. But I think it's a very difficult case to prosecute because it relies on the testimony of children, and because it's going to lack, I think, other sufficient corroborating evidence, and because there is at least a story about why there would be a motive on the part of the children's parents, I should say. It's just going to be a very difficult case to prosecute, and I'm interested to see if New Mexico authorities go forward given what's happened so far. Next, we go into the world of civil litigation, my arena, which I love, and not only that, college football. Duke University filed a lawsuit and is pursuing a claim against its quarterback, Darian Mensah. Now, Mensah had signed one of these NIL deals. He had transferred to Duke last year. He's being paid millions of dollars, and his deal included a commitment through the end of 2026. He tried to enter the transfer portal, and there's talk that he wants to go play at the University of Miami. Their quarterback just ended his 9, 10, or 12, whatever it is, year college career, and now they need another experienced quarterback to come play. So they want to get Mensah, and Mensah entered the portal. Duke University went to court. They're required to arbitrate the claim under the underlying agreement, but they can go to court and get an injunction in aid of arbitration, and that's what they want. Now, the judge did not preclude Mensah from going into the portal, but has ruled on a temporary basis that he can't sign and go play for another school. Initially, a full preliminary injunction hearing had been set for February 2nd. Mensah's lawyers went back to the court and said that's not soon enough. He either has to commit or not commit much sooner than that. We want you to push it up. And now that hearing has been moved up to January 29th. So the question in the Mensah case is whether a contract is going to be enforced. Here's an adult. He's legally an adult, signing an adult contract, earning very adult money. And Duke University says he has to abide the contract. And the contract says he can't go play somewhere else before the end of 2026. The contract says he can't license his NIL rights anywhere else. He can't give his name and image to anybody else. And he would be violating all of those provisions. And the contract says, in particular, that it would be irreparable harm to Duke University if he were permitted to breach it. And that's why Duke University is in court. And I think they have a very strong case for getting an injunction that would keep Mensah from playing for another school. I know that seems kind of wacky, like preventing a college kid from transferring schools, but remember, this has nothing to do with college. This has nothing to do with his education. This is about him playing football for a team. And Duke paid him millions of dollars to play at Duke, and they want to hold him to his end of the bargain. And if we're going to let these athletes sign grown-up deals and make grown-up money, then maybe they got to be treated like grown-ups. It'd be very interesting to see how that case develops. Now, lastly, we go to Columbus, Ohio, where I happen to grow up, where there happens to be another pretty good football school. And there we have the prosecution of Michael McKee for the alleged murder of his ex-wife and her husband, and allegedly McKee, who divorced years ago from the victim, traveled from his Illinois home to Columbus, shot them in the middle of the night, and then traveled back to Illinois. He's been charged with aggravated murder. He is now represented in Columbus by Diane Minash, who I will tell you is an excellent criminal defense lawyer, so he has very good representation. They had an extremely short hearing this morning. Basically, he entered a plea of not, he just appeared remotely. She was in the courtroom, and the lawyer entered his plea of not guilty. And that is about where we are in the case. I think there's 5 counts for aggravated murder, 1 aggravated burglary. We don't know all of the facts. There's been talk that maybe a silencer was used on the gun. That would be very significant evidence in my estimation. If he traveled from Illinois with a gun, with a suppressor, committed a murder, and traveled back, that would be a big deal in the prosecution of the case. They didn't make a bond application. I suspect that's because the chances were between 0 and 0 that bail would be granted in a case like this, so they didn't even bother. They preserve their rights to do so in the future, but I would be surprised if they go forward with it. So I'll tell you, I want to see more of the evidence in this McKee case and understand better what the prosecutors have. I think that will come. But one other thing that really interests me is so far, they're not seeking the death penalty in Ohio. I think it's a crime for which the death penalty could be sought because you have aggravating factors like the use of a weapon, the use of a silencer, premeditation, violent crime. There were children in the house, so you're potentially endangering young children by doing it. It was in the course of breaking into the house potentially or unlawfully entering, so you may have other crimes that it was in the course of. There are a whole bunch of things that would be aggravating factors that would potentially get you to a death penalty case. That doesn't always mean the death penalty is charged. It's much harder to prove a death penalty case. It's much more burdensome on the local community. It's much more expensive. But this is one of my problems with the death penalty. On the one hand, you have Luigi Mangione being prosecuted in New York City, and the federal prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. And now you have this guy in Ohio, and the crime, when you think about it, is essentially the same. The allegation against Mangione is he came in New York with a gun to shoot Brian Thompson, did so, and then fled the state. The allegation against Michael McKee is he came from Illinois into Ohio with a gun, shot his ex-wife and her husband, and fled the state. They're both premeditated acts of gun violence with planning, with premeditation. There's no difference. I mean, there's a slight difference in that McKee was personally connected to the alleged victim, and Mangione didn't have any personal connection that we know about. But that's the only difference. It's the same crime. And part of the problem, part of the basic problem I have with the death penalty, and there are others, is that it is applied not just arbitrarily, but randomly. Sometimes it's in a case, sometimes it's not in a case. Sometimes it gets imposed, sometimes it doesn't get imposed. It's almost impossible to have a consistent application of the death penalty in the United States of America. On top of that, of course, it makes cases very expensive. It makes cases last a long time. It's cruel and unusual punishment. I don't think it's right to kill somebody. We have definitely executed innocent people. That, to me, would be a deal breaker on the death penalty. And the idea that it is some sort of deterrent has been disproved, debunked over and over and over again. So I think there are a lot of reasons not to have a death penalty in this country. But if you're going to have one, it ought to be applied consistently, in my estimation. And I haven't heard anyone really talk about why it isn't at play in this Ohio case and it is at play in the Mangione case. I mean, part of the answer to that is that the federal government is very interested in the prosecution of Luigi Mangione. They do not like the idea of corporate executives being gunned down on the street, and they want the maximum penalty. and they're less concerned. And also, I don't think the federal government's involved in Ohio yet, but there would be less concern about what is essentially a domestic altercation. So really interesting to look at. But there you have it, an extremely busy week across the United States. We get New Mexico, we get New York, we get Ohio, we get Texas. Lots to keep an eye on. I hope that helped bring you up to speed. We'll see you sometime next week. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the snow. For now, we are adjourned.